Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Zero Waste Buildings webinar. My name is Taylor Callahan, and I'm a volunteer for the Illinois Green Alliance Programs Committee and will be your MC for today. Today's webinar is put on by the Programs Committee, an Illinois Green volunteer group that coordinates educational events covering a wide range of topics. The team that put on today's events is Monique Taylor, Ivana Moroz, and Rachel Starr. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First, you have all been muted upon entry, so please type any questions that you have into the chat and we'll try to get them answered during the Q&A at the end. Second, the webinar is being recorded and we will send the recording in a follow-up email. Next slide, please. The Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven, not-for-profit organization that advances green buildings and sustainability communities for all. Our recently launched 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or start on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through educational events such as panelists, building tours, and webinars similar to this one, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. Illinois Green Alliance members can view our recorded webinars in our on-demand webinar library. Check out Illinois Green Alliance's event calendar and our Connect and Learn page for upcoming webinars. Next slide, please. Today you'll be hearing from 3 amazing speakers, the first being Celeste McMickle. Celeste McMickle is the Director of Client Solutions for the True Zero Waste certification with the U.S. Green Building Council. Celeste is trained as an architect and has a background as a sustainability consultant, lead green rater, and waste expert. She serves on the board for the Brooklyn Solid Waste Advisory Board and the NYSAR3 and is a certified master composter and permaculture designer. She is a 2021 recipient for the 40 Under 40 award by Waste 360. Celeste holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Syracuse University and a Master of Science in Sustainable Design from the San Francisco Institute of Architecture. She practices a low to no waste lifestyle at home and loves to talk about trash. The next speaker that you'll hear from is Joe Iosbaker. Joe is a 32-year civil servant at UIC. He's also a recycling coordinator since 2010, a mentor in the Sustainability Internship Program since 2015, and a sustainability liaison to the Sustainable Materials Committee of the Chancellor's Committee on the Sustainability and Energy team since 2015. In 2019, Joe led the establishment of the Zero Waste Task Force of the Directors of Major Administrative Units at UIC. The last speaker you'll hear from today is Jennifer Nelson. Jennifer works for 7 Generations Ahead, a zero waste program expert. She works with communities, institutions, businesses, schools, events, and residents to develop sustainability goals and take those goals from idea to action. This includes strategic planning, waste and cost analysis, outreach, education, and more. Jen is a founding board member of the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition, working to advance food scrap composting through policy and infrastructure change. Jennifer also leads the Wasted Food Action Alliance. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our first speaker, Celeste.
Thanks, Taylor. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you today. Thanks for having me. Excited about our conversation. As mentioned, I'm here to talk about zero waste certification, specifically with True. You can go to the next slide. So most of you are probably familiar with the U.S. Green Building Council, but specifically, usually people are aware of our LEED certification program and are not necessarily always aware of the other sustainability related certifications that we have in our house. So these demonstrate all the different certifications by different sustainability type. And as you can see under waste, we do have the True program. We also have LEED and ARC. These typically are more tracking mechanisms, whereas True is going to be really a full-blown zero waste certification program, which is what differentiates it from our other waste programs, but just to kind of show how all these different programs work together. You can go to the next slide. So True has been part of the USGBC since about 2016. It actually was its own independent nonprofit called the US Zero Waste Business Council prior to that, which some of you may be familiar with actually. But around 2016, it was acquired by the USGBC and rebranded as True. So we've now been with the USGBC for about 5 years, which has been fantastic to be with a larger global nonprofit that's really allowed us to grow and have more of that kind of global impact, which has been really exciting. And this slide here demonstrates actually LEED activity starting in about 2000 to 2020. And you can really see, you know, of course, LEED has really like grown into the predominantly recognized and implemented green building program. And I think it's just fantastic to kind of see how that change happened. And you can really see around that like 2005 to 2007 range where that lift really happens in terms of implementation. And just in terms of True, we're right around that, right? We're right around that like 5-6 years where we're really starting to see that growth and that lift in our numbers of certifications that are moving forward. So we are intending for True to have the same impact in the zero waste realm that LEED had in the green building realm, which is really exciting to see that happening. So next. So in order to understand True, I think it's really important to kind of understand a little bit of the landscape of what's happening in the waste and recycling industry. And I think a lot of us are really aware of that. Obviously, for those of you that are attending the webinar today, this is something that you're interested and excited in learning more about. And really what we're seeing, and I'm sure the other panelists are going to touch on this as well, is we're continuing to recycle more and more, but that is not necessarily having an impact on reduction in landfill. So it's more increased consumption of products that is really leading us down this road, that we're not reducing what's going to landfill. We are increasing what's going to recycling, but as many of you know, we also have challenges with the recycling industry. So I think what this graph really shows is there's this huge opportunity to do more with going beyond recycling and not just relying on only that as our strategy for how we deal with our materials. Next slide. So that really comes down to this idea, this concept of zero waste that we hear thrown around quite a bit. And I think it's an interesting phrase, zero waste. It's used in a lot of different capacities. You hear people using the term zero waste lifestyle, or you see companies having a zero waste goal. But I think there can be a lot of confusion in the market around what it really means to be zero waste. And just coming from the US Green Building Council perspective, I think this is something that we really saw in LEED certification back like before it was very heavily implemented, that people really wanted to build green or do energy efficiency, but there wasn't that consistency or alignment around what that really meant. So what we're trying to do, and I think this is something that the USGBC has always done quite well, is created that consistency and created that standard that then can be applied to these definitions of different sustainability strategies, whether it's green building or zero waste. So that's what we're really focusing on with True, is to create that alignment. Next slide. So in order to do that, we looked at a lot of the work that had been done by organizations such as the EPA and the Zero Waste International Alliance, or ZWIA. And what had been developed was this upside down triangle, which maybe some of you have seen before, called the zero waste hierarchy of highest and best use. And what this triangle demonstrates is the different tiers of how materials should and can be treated in order to improve and maximize upon their environmental and material footprint for as long as possible. So I don't know about all of you, but when I was growing up, we had this idea of reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Like that was what I was taught in school. And I think over the years, we've kind of like condensed that down to mostly just the recycling. And I think that has a lot to do with convenience and other factors, but we tend to now culturally emphasize a little bit less the reduce and the reuse. And what this hierarchy is trying to do is really re-examine those opportunities within the number of R's that we have to figure out, you know, how we can kind of optimize on these strategies. And if we look at the top two tiers, the biggest tiers in this triangle, the things like redesign, reduction, return, reuse, repair, and remanufacture, these are the ways to keep materials in their useful life cycles for as long as possible. These strategies are also known as upstream strategies in that they are things that can happen before the materials actually become waste itself. When we look at the bottom two tiers of this triangle, recycling and composting, and then at the very bottom, landfill or incineration or pollution, these are known as downstream strategies because these are the options that we have when materials have now entered the waste stream. So certainly recycling and composting have their place, but I think what we have to recognize is at the point where they enter the recycling or the composting systems, they're no longer able to really stay in the cycle of what they were intended for, right? Whereas if we looked at these upstream strategies, there's more opportunities for using those materials and keeping them in their highest and best use. So you can go to the next slide. So this is really the framework that we use to develop the TRUE program because we wanted it to really emphasize, next slide, we wanted it to really emphasize these opportunities within the zero waste hierarchy and really refocus things on this idea of upstream strategies. And that's because I think what we see a lot is that companies will tend to only track when they have a zero waste goal, they'll typically only track their downstream waste. So you'll see their recycling numbers, you'll see their landfill numbers, you'll maybe see their composting numbers, but you won't see all the other great things that they're doing that actually have a better environmental impact. So with TRUE, we developed this certification program that is meant to certify facilities, certify events, and certify construction projects. And the goal of all the projects that are participating is to divert all their solid waste from landfill, incineration, also known as waste to energy, and the environment. You can go to the next slide. And we do this by really refocusing the entire waste management program on being resource efficient and rethinking these internal policies and redesigning the business processes to make sure that every material is viewed as a resource. And I think that this is also kind of interesting because with some of our other USGBC programs, things like LEAD, there's really an emphasis on these like large scale infrastructure upgrades, right? Like implementing like new renewable systems or whatever it might be. With TRUE, we're really focused more on the actual operations of the facility. So it's usually more about like analyzing what those business processes are, what the purchasing plans are, and things like that. We have developed a rating system that is filled with credits that can be viewed as strategies to drive that change. So not only is it a certification, but it's really also a roadmap of how to get to zero waste. So you can go to the next slide. We do follow similar other USGBC, certification tiers with the certified silver, gold, and platinum, different points lining up with different levels of certification. Next slide. This is a very quick overview. I won't go through it in too much detail of our requirements for TRUE certification. I believe we're going to be able to get these slides out to all the participants, and certainly if you have questions, you can reach out to me. But I think the main item here that I would highlight is this second check mark, which is that average of 90% greater diversion from landfill incineration for 12 months is required. So this is actually the participation point for any facilities that are going to be participating in the program. They need to be at least 90% diversion to be able to even participate in the program. And then anything above that is going to, help with achieving these higher certification tiers. Next slide. So this is an overview of our categories and points. And I like to show this slide because I think this is a step in the process of seeing that zero waste hierarchy come alive. Because when you're at first looking at these concepts, it's really hard to understand, okay, like redesign, reduction, reuse, what are these? And what we do is we have really turned them into these categories that then you'll see in another couple slides that we have actual strategies that are associated with these credits. So it becomes a really easily translatable way to turn that zero waste vision into an actual action plan, which is very exciting. You'll see in here that, we do, of course, have those upstream strategies, redesign, reduce, reuse, but we also, like bottom left, we have a section on zero waste purchasing, which is actually worth the most points in our rating system and is a really important part of a zero waste program. Also things like hazardous waste prevention, leadership and training. It's a very robust plan that is meant to really support the transition of facilities towards that more circular economy upstream strategy. Next slide. So this is just, again, meant to demonstrate that sort of balance between the upstream waste prevention ideas and the downstream waste management, and heavily weighted towards the prevention. Again, I think recycling, composting, and diversion, these are always going to be important parts of a facility's materials management plan, but we just really like to, again, focus that idea on the upstream. Next slide. So this slide is, I know there's a lot of information on here, but again, this is that place where that comes alive. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing some of those different credit categories like leadership and training, which I emphasized, and then you see all the different credits below them. This is just a snapshot out of our rating system, which is very much available for free on our website, and I can also send out to make sure it gets circulated. But we have all the different credits that we've identified as being an important part of a leadership plan or of a training plan. And then on the right-hand side, we've gone into more detail to really help those facilities understand what is actually needed for each of those credits. So what is the intent? What are the requirements? What are the strategies? And what are the documentations? We have that all there very nicely laid out. Next slide. And this is one of the places where True is really unique, because again, what I said at the beginning about, facilities that have zero waste plans often will just demonstrate what their end numbers are, what their final recycling numbers are, what their final, landfill numbers might be. But what we do is in our actual waste tracking data, we encourage our clients to put their numbers in there for things like reuse items, for things like reduction items. You can see that whole section for zero waste diversion calculators. And that has to do with actually putting those elements of things that were redesigned or, different thought policies that went into kind of how we could move the system to the upstream. And we want those numbers to actually be in that calculation because, again, these are the more environmentally preferable strategies for reducing waste, is just, eliminating it from happening in the first place. Of course, recycling is also going to be in there, but we include these other elements as well. Next slide. So I mentioned we do events and construction. We also do all types of facilities themselves. So we have everything from commercial buildings, we have museums, we have a public park that's actually going through True. We have a lot of different exciting projects that are all finding opportunities for implementing this zero waste plan as part of their efforts. And it's been just great to see, that diversity in project type. Very exciting. And in the next slide, you'll see that we also have this different strategies available depending on where a facility or a company might be at in their zero waste journey. So if a facility was coming into the program really wanting to get involved, but not sure they could hit that 90%, they have the opportunities to start with pre-certification, which is a way of beginning to implement these zero waste strategies and receiving recognition for it while on the way to that goal of getting to zero waste. And then of course we have facilities that come in at silver certification and then they might want to come back at platinum later. Next slide. For any organizations that are also working with LEED, we do have LEED Zero, which has a achievement in different tiers of net zero energy, net zero water, net zero emissions, and net zero waste. In order to hit the LEED Zero for waste, a facility needs to achieve True Platinum. So there's a lot of alignment there between the LEED Zero program and the True program, which is a really exciting opportunity for those LEED certified projects that want to hit a LEED Zero category. Next slide. And then the last thing I'll touch on is that we do have also, in addition to our facility certification, we have an individual professional certificate program called the True Advisor. And if you go to the next slide, we can see some True Advisors in action. And this is a great opportunity to receive some zero waste education. It is a module-based training program that gives an overview of zero waste practices and philosophy, but also goes into a deep dive in True itself to really learn about the rating system and the program. And the True Advisors are really the ones on the ground on the site that are making True happen. So they're often going to be the facility manager or an intern that's supporting the program or a consultant that's brought in. We have students go through the program. It's a really great way to get involved in zero waste and get involved in the certification of a facility that's trying to achieve zero waste. So we're really excited about our True Advisors. We work with them really closely. They're a very important part of our network. The program is growing very quickly and it's definitely a fun thing to get involved with. And then, yeah, we just are, again, a program that's really focused on this idea of going beyond recycling. We really want facilities that are thinking of zero waste to think of it not just as an end diversion goal, but a really whole systems thinking approach. And then just on the next two slides, very quickly, you can see that we are moving forward with our Green Build Conference this September. So check that out if you're interested. And then on the next slide, there's just some information about our website, the True Advisor. We've got a lot of fun resources. We do events also, and we just really encourage everyone to get involved. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for listening. Happy to answer any questions. And at this time, I will transition over to our next speaker, Joe.
Thank you, Celeste. So again, I'm Joe Iosbaker. I'm the recycling coordinator at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The department I'm in is called Planning, Sustainability, and Project Management, and I'm in the Sustainability Office. So I want to talk about, as I named it, Zero Waste Campus, or how I spent my pandemic year, because despite the fact that our 33,000 students left a year ago, we continued to grapple with and try to move forward our zero waste agenda. UIC's climate commitment, is to divert 90% of our municipal solid waste from landfill, through, source reduction, materials reuse, recycling, composting, and just, just to give you a scope of, an idea of the scope of our campus. In addition to our 33,000 students, we have 13,000 staff. We have a medical center with 500,000 patient visits a year and tens of thousands of other visitors. So over the past decade, we've grappled with how to achieve zero waste. And, I'm sure folks know we're required by state law to update our waste reduction plans every 5 years. So in 2019, we undertook a deep system-wide analysis, including a major waste audit of all the activity zones across campus and areas on campus. Next slide, please. This photo kind of captures, what we found in this major waste audit. This collection of cups and lids. These were 6.37% of what we found in the 3,800 pounds that we sampled over several days. If we raise this to the level of the total waste on campus annually, we would be talking about 50 tons of just disposable beverage cups. And this is just, I don't know, I think it's a good image to grapple with. Next slide. So this graphic, this shows our diversion rate and our struggle. The purple part of this shows our waste and recycling streams. Again, this is just municipal solid waste, which is a total of about 8,000 tons a year. The black line graph, though, shows the progress we've made since 2008, which is when our diversion rate leapt to a 40% per year. But since then, we've struggled to reach 50%. Our calendar year for 2020 was at 52%, but that's without 33,000 students on campus. So in order to reach 90% by 2050, we have to be advancing 2% year over year. Next slide. So out of that major waste audit, we developed a much more comprehensive materials management plan, which which was developed by a partnership between our office. There's a Chancellor's Committee on Sustainability and Energy, which has a sustainable materials subcommittee, and then the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center, which I'm sure many of you know, it's headquartered down in Urbana. And through the waste audits, we produced this plan that it identifies impactful actions that we need to take in terms of, again, reduction, but also outreach and education. We came away with strategic measures that we believe will get us to our zero waste goal by the year 2050. So what are some of these measures? Next slide, please. So this is a pie chart. I know people hate these, but they're still functional. They're still useful. And this shows, you know, what's in the trash. And really the thing I want to focus on is the green section, because that's the compostable matter. And we discovered it makes up almost a third of the waste generated on campus, and half of that, the larger piece of the pie there, is food scraps. So you know, in essence, what we found from the waste audits was that there could be as much as 830 tons of food scraps in our waste stream beyond what we've been capturing. We've had a back of the house collection in our big kitchens on campus for about for 8 or 9 years, and that totals about 50 or 60 tons annually. So this is multiples of that. And there are other features that suggest we have major work to do. You know, for example, you know, the recyclable materials like paper and plastic make up another 19% of what's in our waste stream. You know, although we're capturing, you know, enormous, you know, tons, especially of paper in our recycling efforts. You know, still, you know, there's a lot of room for improvement, but we determined that initiating a post-consumer compost collection was a priority. Next slide. Just a quick point on the history of compost collection. Advances in the industry in Chicago, particularly in the form of the haulers, and I want to point to our hauler, Collective Resource, Inc., brought the level of service that we needed. I mean, what I'm talking about is one of our very large kitchens is in our hospital. And, you know, you can't have a compost collection in a hospital if the bins are sitting on the dock for, you know, for a lengthy period of time. That you get vector issues, and we just couldn't have that. So I wanted to give recognition to Collective Resource. Next slide, please. But so the next strategic initiative that came out of this planning process was a zero waste task force. So prior to the materials management plan, we knew that we needed the efforts of major waste generating units on campus. But the audits, the analysis of existing conditions, the key findings, you know, for example, the presence of compostables in every unit we examined, they identified the need for broad shared responsibility among all university units and departments. So the task force was formed in November of this last year, and we invited the major units on campus that have a lot of waste at the vice chancellor level, the college level, department level, or building level, to appoint an administrative staff to this campus-wide body. We now have 13 units that are part of that task force, and they are to guide the implementation of the zero waste plans for their individual units, along with the guidance of the sustainability program and the recycling coordinator. So this was a second priority toward our goal. Next slide, please. I want to also talk about this recommendation, key recommendation from our plan, which is for units to form green teams. This is a photo of members of our hospital green team, which was really our model that we used to, you know, in recommending this measure for all other units on campus. Excuse me. The green team is a best practice to prioritize and plan goals and to organize staff in the unit to achieve them. The hospital green team involves the administration, staff with responsibilities for facilities and procurement, housekeeping, food service, but also important units, nursing services, and interested individual faculty, staff, and even students. I had worked with the green team starting in 2018, and in the last 3 years, well, going on a 4th year, we've seen the diversion rate just for the hospital increase from 22% to 40%, and then this past year to 50%. So these green teams, this is a priority as well. Next slide. And I mentioned that zero waste plans are another strategic objective. The hospital green team developed a plan, which is part of, for those of you who are familiar with healthcare, there is a network nationally called Practice Green Health. And through that is how the hospital developed their zero waste plan. But we took the general experience and recommended it to all of our major units: housing, our student centers, our event facilities, research facilities, the other clinical buildings on campus, dentistry. So we now have 10 units that have established green teams, and 8 are adopting zero waste plans. Next slide, please. So I want to talk now about the implementation of the compost collection. Again, we already have back of the house. We have to move towards having post-consumer compost collections. So these are pictures of our current recycling stations. At the March meeting of the task force, I made a proposal to introduce post-consumer food scrap collections in a number of areas on campus in the coming months. So we had to have an idea, what equipment would we use that would suit the current collection program. So these recycling stations, or 3 sets, as the building service workers call them, this is our standard equipment. We have about 3,000 of these. Some buildings have cabinets, but most buildings have these 3 23-gallon bins. There's about, like I said, there's about 3,000 sets of them, or close to 10,000 bins. And they're divided up into what we call landfill, and then paper and bottles and cans. Next slide. So we're adding a 4th bin. I had an intern this spring, and he researched other schools in the Midwest, who, especially, big campuses, state universities that were in major cities. And we found that the University of Minnesota had the same system of hallway bins, and then they introduced compost. So they added a 4th bin to their stations. So, and then my intern wrote a grant proposal and got funding from the sustainability fee on campus. And we purchased 100-some additional bins, and we're going to be rolling them out in 4 units, including a campus childcare center, the dining halls, public health, and pharmacy at the beginning of the semester, which starts next week. Next slide, please. And now I want to switch gears and just talk about another aspect of what we believe is a key element in the zero waste strategy, and that is a strategic partnership with building services. So, here's a rhetorical question. How many full-time employees are there in the recycling program at UIC? The answer is 1, me. In reality, the recycling staff include, first, the building service workers, the drivers in the transportation, because we haul our own recyclables for the most part. And of course, everyone has a role to play, the students, all staff, but who thinks about recycling every day as a result of their job duties? And, so the building service workers in each building, they carry the waste streams from the stations to the dock, where there's corresponding containers for paper and for waste and for cardboard and clear bags of bottles and cans, which are carried along actually with our refuse. So we recognized some years ago that achieving our zero waste goals had to include empowering the building service workers to have responsibility for the program in their building. So the materials management plan included that recommendation and also made several other recommendations. For one, raising the pay of the starting salary for building service workers, because at the time of that survey, the starting wage was less than $13 an hour, and that was specifically listed as a strategic objective because the building services have had just terrible turnover, and wages is a large part of it. I also want to point out, here that a large majority of the BSWs are Black, Latino, or immigrants. And so addressing their role also means looking through the lens of social justice. So those buildings that add compost will require then a fifth destination for waste. And in one sense, it's the same weight of waste being hauled, but it's an additional procedure, it's an additional piece of equipment to attend to. So it's just one small example that the experiences and support of these workers are needed to get to our zero waste goal. Thank you very much. And now on to my dear friend, Jen.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Joe. I probably have to turn my camera on for everybody. Oh, there we go. I wanted to thank you for the introduction, Joe. Thank you, Illinois Green Alliance, for inviting me to be here today. And you've already gotten to hear from Celeste about why this is important, what's needed for true certification, Joe about all of the fantastic work at the University of Illinois. I'm now going to wrap us back around and share some of the highlights of a few amazing buildings that I've had the privilege of working with towards being net zero waste. Next slide. My work with nonprofit 7 Generations Ahead is to build healthy and sustainable communities. I began as our zero waste schools expert, and then our work grew to support institutions, businesses, municipalities, and more. As a founding board member of the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition, I worked to advance both policy and infrastructure for composting food scraps in Illinois. And my work with the Wasted Food Action Alliance connects the gaps between prevention, food rescue, and food scrap recycling. This focus will mean that my presentation today will lean a little bit in the direction of buildings and how they address food waste, in addition to all the other waste streams and recycling. Next slide. The U.S. Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Management Program defines net zero waste as working to reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, or recover solid waste streams, resulting in no waste disposal to landfills or incinerators. I do feel like I'm always talking about this being a journey towards net zero waste, because I think it's very hard to get to that final actually achieving the whole thing, but every step that we take in the right direction is a help. A net zero waste building integrates methods that handle the expected waste streams that are produced through general operations of the building. That considers physical space, looking at local or regional waste disposal programs. It includes green procurement, any permitting or regulatory requirements that are needed to support waste diversion and treatment. What's challenging is that circumstances vary significantly depending on the type of building you're talking about, what the building is used for, the geographic location, the contracted haulers and the services they can provide, and so much more. And all of this doesn't even touch on the people part of the equation. I just want to start with the fact that diverting waste from the landfill seems like a simple concept, but the added costs and the added work that people project are going to happen often cause for hesitation. And a well-designed program addresses these concerns and therefore has greater success and sustainability. And I need next slide twice, actually. We can go one more. Thank you. Today, I'll highlight the process needed to design or modify a building to be net zero waste. The basic process can be used for any building, whether a school, an institution, apartment building, or more. Each will have their own unique qualities, but the process remains the same. And as I'm talking through the process, you can reflect on what Joe said and the steps that they took at the university to see that this is something that each of these steps contributed. Next slide, please. As we're looking, Joe talked about, he gave you a pie chart, he talked about measuring and understanding. Measuring and evaluating a building is a critical starting point. You need to define the waste streams that are produced during normal operation of the building. You want to understand building function and identify if there are potential materials that are unique or would have a waste impact that you might not otherwise have thought of. And the waste assessment or waste audit is really going to be about helping you determine both space and labor needs to understand what's going to fit within that building. Next slide, please. After you've got this plan and these measurements, you want to engage and educate. And this is so much more than just talking to every employee, but it means that you really want to identify diverse leadership for zero waste. Joe mentioned, engaging people across the university, making sure different departments were a part of the plan. That's critical, from top level to all the way, to the custodians. Having people as a part of designing and implementing your program is going to make it more successful. Planning is important, but adapting is critical. Knowing that best laid plans lead you to discover new opportunities and new directions. And then you're going to want to communicate success, including the waste impacts, looking at what kinds of education is needed about new procedures and more. Next slide, please. And I'm actually going to go one more slide ahead. We only have 15 minutes, so I've put some more information in the deck that will be shared with you that I'm actually going to discuss today. I did want to just share a resource. There's so many great resources out there for buildings. The federal government has handbooks for net zero energy, water, and waste, both for existing buildings and new buildings, with great examples. And I've linked one here in the presentation so you can take a look at it. This is specific to federal buildings, but there's so many great things you can pull from it. Next slide. I'll share a few case studies with you to highlight the process of becoming net zero waste and how that's been used to impact schools, a jail, and communities. The first example is the work of 7 Generations Ahead, our Zero Waste Schools program with Chicago Public Schools. There are currently 14 schools that not only recycle, but are able to compost all of their organic waste from their lunchrooms and kitchens. Next slide. The planning for space and operational changes that's needed to support a net zero waste program in a school includes addressing how and where students eat, the flow of students as they exit the lunchroom or cafeteria. How many exits are there? Where can sorting stations be placed to be easily accessed? Based on a waste assessment that you do, this gives you all of those answers to the number of sorting stations, the equipment, and supplies. Next slide. This slide includes examples of some of the types of sorting stations that are being used in schools. The image on the left is of a built-in sorting station that was included when the school was renovated. Before this program was implemented, this station went unused. The design of this area, which was partially put in here to help achieve LEED certification, unfortunately failed to account for the high number of students that we're going to need to go through and make it through the line quickly. We were able to rework that space and launch a program using it, but other stations have been fabricated to make signage easy. The center images are of 2 other schools where they created a sorting station that can hang the signs at eye level for students. And then other schools may simply use rolling containers in a line with color coding and signage taped on the walls, as can be seen in the image on the right. Next slide. This diagram depicts the before of a high school cafeteria with 35 bins scattered around the room, 24 of which were for garbage and 11 for recycling. Every square on this is a different kind of container that was in this one lunchroom. If you go to the next slide, the plan for this space resulted in a total of only 15 bins being used, 3 sorting stations. Not only is this more efficient and cost savings, but it also leads to less contamination by having the containers grouped together. Next slide. In addition to space constraints inside of schools, there are often challenges related to outdoor or dock space. Designing for net zero waste needs to incorporate this space as well to ensure easy access to dumpsters, carts, and compactors, both for custodial staff and for hauling trucks. We had one school launching a zero waste program, but their lead remodel plan had reduced the footprint of their dumpster enclosure, and there was no way to reconfigure the space to allow for food scrap composting to be included. As I wrap up the case study, next slide. As I wrap up the case study, I'm joining Joe in sharing pie charts. My apologies. But I think it's exciting to note that Chicago Public Schools Commercial Composting and Recycling Program has had a huge impact. This chart shows the impact at one school. Only 6% of the waste was being recycled before the program, and after implementation, 89% was able to be diverted through recycling, composting, and liquid diversion. Oh, thank you, Dan. I appreciate those who like pie charts too. It's amazing to think of the impact. This program started in 2014 with 5 schools and is now in 14 schools, engaging over 10,000 students daily. And did I mention that CPS has transitioned all of their schools to certified compostable lunch trays and have announced plans to expand composting to additional schools? The potential impact is really exciting and amazing. Next slide. This slide includes a number of resources for working with a school to become net zero waste. It's embedded with links, and it's going to be made available to you through the Illinois Green Alliance after the webinar. I would draw your attention to the resource that we have. We have a guide for reducing wasted food in schools. And yes, Lois, I will provide a list of the schools as well. It's not in here. But please consider checking out these great resources or reaching out and contacting me. Next slide. The second case study I'll share is of the collaborative work of Lake County, the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, and the Lake County Adult Corrections, the jail. This project included implementing solutions for increased waste diversion through recycling and composting, and developing a sorting and disposal system that reduces energy usage, heat pollutants, and greenhouse gases. Next slide. 7 generations ahead collaborated with the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, officers and staff of the jail, Aramark kitchen staff, and inmate labor to conduct a jail waste assessment of a 24-hour period. The assessment was performed to determine the percent of jail waste by volume that could be recycled or composted. And the data was used to help inform the county of needed service levels if they were to implement a composting program. Next slide. Prior to the waste audit, Lake County sent pretty much all of its waste to the landfill. The one thing we weren't able to capture during the assessment was the cardboard boxes that were being diverted. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to be included in this. So the audit did reveal that a significant amount of waste could be diverted, over 70%, through composting or recycling. And compostable food waste was over 50% of the volume and almost 80% of the weight of what was being thrown away. The jail cut down both on the amount of garbage sent to landfill and the frequency of hauler service for their landfill compactor, both of which resulted in cost savings. And that savings is used to pay for the compost hauling service that they now have. Next slide. As with planning in the schools, planning in the jail included assessing where food was prepared and served, equipment needed, looking at additional security and access considerations. I mentioned before the process is the same, but every building has its own unique ones. Access to the dock where the hauling containers was limited and required an officer to accompany inmates and unlock dumpsters. So again, being able to assess where we were and what was going to be needed was critical, both indoor and outdoor. Next slide. We mapped out who was going to play a role in each part of the facility to ensure that we had a plan that made sense and could be taught at every level. Aramark, the contracted food service provider, was a part of this from the beginning. Through the audit, they helped to identify ways to reduce waste and save money, and working to make sure that the new system we were putting in place of sorting food scraps for composting would fit within the flow of labor in the kitchen. The jail does have inmate labor in the kitchen and throughout the facility, and we had to identify how we could work with a changing inmate population. A limited number of inmates that could work, and so many other factors. Next slide. I'll leave you with that this program has been a huge success, and the Walter Willis, who is the executive director of the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, tells the story of jail composting and recycling program through this video that I've linked you to. And so you can check it out. Sergeant Sheeline has shared and done presentations on what's been working in the jail. One of the questions that came up was about the impacts of COVID. And I can tell you that COVID had a huge impact on the jail program. And the composting component was stopped for a while. And they've been working to reinstitute it. We were able to get recycling back up and going, but composting isn't quite there yet. Next slide. So this is a quote from Walter Willis from SWALCO, and it was the county jail was able to make this program pay for itself. I think that's an important thing to think about in Illinois. One of the tricks of looking at net zero waste buildings is figuring out how you can clearly have a cost savings if you're reducing what you're purchasing, but sometimes the recycling and the composting component of it needs to be set up well if you're going to save money. Next slide. My third and final example is of net zero waste in your community. And for this discussion, I'm going to focus on the role that municipal food scrap composting can play in this area. Next slide. So we're all on the same page. Municipal food scrap composting is the collection of food scraps and sometimes compostable food soiled paper, sometimes compostable serviceware, and other organic waste. That waste is hauled by a hauler and sent to a commercial composting facility where it is added to existing yard waste and then it's treated and becomes a product that returns nutrition to the soil. Next slide. So things have changed in Illinois, and I can't even emphasize the fact that we were 10 years ago, there would have been nothing on this slide to show you in Illinois related to food scrap composting. Illinois currently has 60 municipal food scrap composting programs, which is amazing. 60 municipalities offer food scrap composting to their residents in one form or another. What that tells you is that both infrastructure and policy have advanced in Illinois in the past 10 years, making the opportunity to compost food scraps increasingly available and affordable. The Illinois Food Scrap Coalition has a We Compost program that recognizes buildings and businesses and grocery stores. And next slide. This slide includes a number of great resources to learn more about composting in your community. We have a residential food scrap composting guide for municipalities, as well as a one-page overview. And just remember that the community infrastructure is important as we work to bring more buildings to be net zero waste. It shows that there are haulers that are willing to haul food scraps in that area, as well as food scrap compost processor nearby too. Next slide. I want to wrap up with the note that planning, engaging, and implementing are the first parts of the process that's needed for a building to become net zero waste. The final component needed is to ensure that net zero waste plan is integrated into the operations and management of the building. From custodial services to procurement policies to expectations of subcontractors, all of these components are what help keep a building on the net zero waste path and ensure that these efforts continue as contracts change, people change, and time goes by. Next slide. So 15 minutes flew by. I do welcome any questions today, or please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about any of these case studies that I've shared. And thank you for your time and attention. And thank you again to the Illinois Green Alliance for inviting me to participate. And I'll turn it back to you for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, Joe, and Celeste. It was wonderful having you. We do have 5 minutes for Q&A, so we have a lot of questions. If we don't get to your question, we will try to follow up with you, but I did pull out some questions that we could sort of discuss. The first one is, how do you address the somewhat misguided belief that recycling haulers do not actually recycle the material they pick up?
Can I take that one? I think an important part of that is to actually learn and see what's happening. When we're working with a building, we are often showing them the path that the waste takes, whether it's taking them on a tour or having video footage of a tour we've already done. And I think that's important. I think there have been, especially in the Chicago area, some major doubts about what's happening with those materials. And we won't really start a program until we know for sure where it's going and we can track that path.
And can I jump in there as well, Taylor? I think a guerrilla war is a good metaphor to think about the struggle against those beliefs. And, you know, of course, as Jen alluded, Chicago and its poor recycling history continued to, you know, reproduce those ideas. But, you know, I think that, you know, that we have to, you know, be, you know, giving, you know, people, you know, real experience to understand that, you know, our efforts do, you know, end up with things, you know, going into a, you know, being diverted. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to, you know, share with people the message that we can't recycle our way out of this crisis, and that waste reduction, as well as pressure on, you know, the producers of all that plastic and waste, has to be part of the solution as well.
And I would just add real quick, because we talk about this a lot also, that, you know, recycling is just one of those really interesting industries, in that it's like everybody participates in it for the most part, but it's a very complex and involved industry. And so even though everyone has to participate in it, not everybody necessarily is going to understand it, right? So I really try and communicate, like, believe in the recycling system, like it is doing good things. It's going to be really hard to communicate to the individual consumer, like every change within the recycling industry, because it's basically like having to be an expert in it, right? But at the same time, the average person, for the most part, is going to be involved in some way. So it's kind of a tricky one. It's like finding the balance between those two things, but, you know, believing that it is working, but really like doing research on what is happening locally so that you can stay informed and know what actually can be recycled.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We'll take one or two more questions. Joe, there was a lot about UIC, and two questions that kept coming up is good resources to show what materials go into what bins. And there were a lot of questions around the lids of disposable cups. What did you do with those? Joe, you are on mute.
We've done a couple things with the disposable cups. We have a program in mind, although we are not rolling it out now, which is to, you know, introduce you know, several different, you know, measures to get people to, you know, to bring their own beverage bottles. And, you know, we've got water bottle refilling stations, you know, that we have hundreds of them across, almost 400 of them across campus now. But it's, you know, with COVID, all of those measures, it's been hard to expand them. We are moving to introduce the Aussie reusable, you know, food and drink system, you know, food boxes and beverage cups and flatware into our major dining halls. So those are good. And, you know, signage is important. But the thing that we see is that we have to have we have to practice our way into correct thinking. We have so many students and staff who come here, who come from communities where there either isn't recycling, or there's heavy, to borrow a term, there's questioning going on about whether recycling works. So we have to convince them by having as an institution an energetic practice of recycling.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are at our time. Jen, Celeste, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for attending and being great participants in the chats. We will be sending this presentation in a follow-up email along with the panelists' contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If not, we look forward to seeing you on an upcoming webinar soon. Thanks and have a great day. Stay safe.